This semester, we'll be exploring the principles of rhetoric, or the art of persuasion. The Greek philosopher Aristotle is credited for being the first person to systematize the study of rhetoric. However, until he did so, his own teacher, Plato, was firmly against its instruction. Plato's view of rhetoric was informed by how it was taught by a group known as the Sophists, who, according to Plato, taught their students to manipulate others without regard to ethics or truth. Understanding his teacher's concern, Aristotle broke the art of rhetoric into three branches: ethos, pathos, and logos. Ethos refers to establishing credibility as an ethical human being with an audience's best interests at heart. Pathos refers to appealing to an audience's emotions and values. And logos refers to the logical consistency of an argument along with any concrete proof provided. We'll explore ethos and pathos later, but let's start with logos. Aristotle included logos to ease his teacher's concern about the use of rhetoric to manipulate others. By studying logos, we can learn not only how to build an argument based on truth and logical reasoning, but also how to protect ourselves from manipulation by others. The better we can recognize flaws in logic, the better we can guard ourselves from such manipulation and more clearly think for ourselves. To start our journey, let's review a few basic terms in logic. First, all arguments are based on assumptions. An assumption is an unstated belief, something accepted as true. Although beliefs may not always need to be stated directly, it's important that we examine assumptions to evaluate our own arguments as well as the arguments of others. When these beliefs are stated directly, they are called premises. Stating premises directly helps ensure that both the speaker and the audience recognize the consistency of an argument. While obvious premises may be omitted, before firmly adopting a particular position on a subject, people should at least consider their assumptions as well as the conclusions that result from them. For example, suppose someone starts with the argument, all sex offenders should be executed. Their assumption might be that all sex offenders pose a serious danger to the public. But if they examine that assumption, they might realize that in Texas, urinating in public can cause someone to be labeled as a sex offender. Urinating in public is something people definitely should avoid. However, most people would not believe that somebody should be executed for doing so. So, after examining and rejecting this assumption, the author would now want to qualify their original position, perhaps arguing that dangerous sex offenders should be executed. This example, by the way, is actually based on a thesis statement written by a former student that I had in upstate New York. When I engaged the class in an exercise of brainstorming arguments against their position, he stubbornly refused, declaring there are no reasonable arguments against executing sex offenders. I asked him if there might be anyone that could be considered a sex offender but not deserve the death penalty. But he insisted, no, there are no exceptions. Over time, though, a sudden realization passed over his face, and he sheepishly confessed, actually, I just turned 19, and my girlfriend is still technically 16. He said that a month later she would turn 17, that they were only 2 years and 2 months apart. But technically, by the laws in New York at that time, if they had engaged in any intimate relations, he himself could have been considered a sex offender. So, I didn't inquire any further, but the student making this argument might have been sentencing himself to death. Fortunately, after examining his assumption that all sex offenders pose a serious danger to the public, he was able to qualify his argument to something like serial pedophiles should be executed, which more accurately reflected his actual views. So, it's definitely important to examine our own assumptions before fiercely clinging to any given viewpoint. Okay, but if we go back to our vocabulary, an assumption is an unstated belief or accepted truth upon which an argument is built. When these beliefs are stated, they are called premises. When a major premise and a minor premise are combined to draw a deductive conclusion, the structure is known as a syllogism. The classic example is, if all men are mortal and Socrates is a man, then Socrates must be mortal. This is a deductive argument where the major premise states an accepted generality, all men are mortal, all men will die one day, and combines it with an accepted truth about a specific occurrence. Socrates is a man. From this major premise and minor premise, we have to draw the conclusion that Socrates is mortal. If we accept the idea that all men are mortal, and we accept the idea that Socrates is a man, the only logical conclusion is that Socrates is mortal. Socrates, by the way, was the teacher of Plato. So we have three major Greek philosophers: Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Socrates was all about questioning the world, so much so that he refused to write down any of his own ideas for fear that people would avoid thinking for themselves, that they would take his words as absolute truth and no longer ask any questions. In any case, Socrates taught Plato, and Plato taught Aristotle, who is considered the founder of systematic rhetoric. Okay, back to our vocabulary. So, we have two forms of reasoning, deductive and inductive. Deductive logic draws a conclusion from stated generalities, and inductive infers a probability based on collected evidence. For example, my classmates Jaden, Nathan, and Samuel like pizza. My classmates Robin, Catalina, and Joe also like pizza. I like pizza. Therefore, the rest of my classmates probably enjoy pizza. In this case, an inference is drawn from collected data. Suppose there are 20 students in a class, and the speaker knows how 7 of them feel about pizza. Since none of the known samples dislike pizza, the speaker might infer that most students in the class enjoy pizza. This is a probability, but not an absolute truth. It's still possible that all 13 of the other students do not like pizza. Here's another example of inductive reasoning. If most Greeks eat fish, and Socrates was a Greek, Socrates most likely ate fish. Here, we infer the probability that Socrates ate fish based on collected data about most Greeks. We don't know for certain that Socrates likes fish, but we can guess that he probably did. Okay, so again, inductive reasoning infers a probability based on collected data, and deductive reasoning draws a conclusion from general beliefs and accepted truths. Not all arguments are provable, and a lot of our arguments will be based on our best guesses about what is true or not. Or perhaps we might build arguments based on moral codes or beliefs that cannot be proven. For example, we should treat other human beings as we would like to be treated. This is a widely accepted belief, but not everyone believes it. Some people think they deserve to be treated better than they treat others. However, we can still build arguments based on this belief and remind an audience that if they believe that we should treat other human beings as we would like to be treated, and they accept that customer service representatives are human beings, then to be logically consistent, the audience must agree that we should treat customer service representatives as we would like to be treated. So here we have a logically consistent argument based on a belief that we can't prove as being absolutely true, but still has validity with our audience. So, because we can't always prove our premises with absolute certainty, we have arguments that are valid, which means that they're logically consistent, that the conclusion follows from the stated premises, and we have arguments that are sound. A sound argument is both true and valid, but a valid argument doesn't necessarily have to be true. For example, if we take the argument that all cows are green and Betsy is a cow, Betsy must be green. This argument is valid even though it's not true. The major premise that all cows are green is not true. However, the argument as a whole is valid because if someone believes that all cows are green and they believe that Betsy is a cow, in order to be logically consistent, they have to agree that Betsy is green. So this argument is valid because the conclusion logically follows from the premises. Let's look at an invalid argument though. Suppose somebody argues that if all cows breathe air and Betsy breathes air, Betsy must be a cow. This argument is invalid. It is true that all cows breathe air. It might be true that Betsy is a cow, but the claim that Betsy breathes air does not prove that she's a cow. Betsy might be a dog or a bird. The conclusion that she is a cow may or may not be true, but the argument is invalid because the conclusion does not follow from the premises. Here's another example. If all zebras have stripes and Eeyore has stripes, then Eeyore must be a zebra. This also is an invalid argument. To my knowledge, it is true that all zebras have stripes, but having stripes won't make anyone a zebra. Eeyore could be a tiger or a skunk or a donkey painted to look like a zebra. So this argument is invalid. If we rearrange it and say all zebras have stripes, Eeyore is a zebra, therefore Eeyore has stripes, this is logically consistent. If we believe that all zebras have stripes, if we accept that as a true fact, and we believe that Eeyore is a zebra, then to be logically consistent, we have to agree that Eeyore has stripes. Okay, so this argument is valid. As far as Eeyore goes, I just made up the name, so I don't want to say it's really sound, but if we did have a zebra named Eeyore, then yes, it would be a sound argument. But remember, to be sound, an argument has to be both valid and true. So here's an example of a sound argument. If all dogs breathe air and Chihuahuas are dogs, then Chihuahuas breathe air. This argument is sound because it is both true and valid. All dogs do breathe air, and it logically follows that if Chihuahuas are dogs, they must also breathe air. So an argument is valid if it's logically consistent, and an argument is sound if it is both valid and true.